In another video, I've provided a short tutorial on how to do a turned edge applique using freezer paper. Some people have asked me about how to prepare templates for this, and so I've decided to do this other very short tutorial on how I prepare templates in some cases. Basically, in cases like this one, when I have a large pieces, large design, easy pieces to do. So usually what people do is you just print out your pattern and you trace it onto your freezer paper. And that I have done for some pattern. I do some patterns by just turning it over using a light table or tablet, and then tracing each of the pieces onto the freezer paper. But there's another way to do it that's quicker, so you don't have to trace everything. So what I do is this is the original design. Okay, and you see that the layout is the right side up. This is what I will be using to place my placement guide. So once I have all my pieces prepared, I will lay my background fabric on top of this, and using a light tablet, I will just trace some placement guides in order to know where to put my pieces. And then I have joined 6 different sections for this particular pattern, and I've done the same thing with freezer paper, except that when I printed out the freezer paper design, I mirrored the design. So as you can see here, this is a mirror image. See, here's the larger bird, here's the smaller bird, and this is a mirror image of the original design. And then all I'm going to do is cut out the pieces directly from this freezer paper. Now, in cases like here, we have, wherever you have a piece that lies on top of another piece, then what you want to do is cut the piece that will be on top. And then there's some here, these leaves, some of these thin ones I will embroider. But then others, even though these are separate pieces in the pattern, I'm going to cut this as one piece, these broader pieces, so that I don't have to worry with appliquing separate pieces. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just go ahead and cut out templates. And when I have templates like this one, I will go ahead and cut out this one and the large one. I'm not going to worry about the eye, because the eye is something I would probably embroider. Okay, but let's get started and I'll show you. Okay, so here you can see that I have cut out the stem, and I have left, I've cut out the stem and then right out of the leaf. And this isn't really a problem, because when I turn the edge over, it's just a very short distance that needs to be covered here, and the stem will be going on top anyway. So I don't worry about cutting into the different pieces as need be. So here are all my pieces cut out. As you can see, this is the right side of the freezer paper, the paper side, and then the plastic side, and these pieces all fit. The only other thing that I've done is for some pieces are really small, and so I'd rather use another technique for those, like the two beaks and the eyes. And for that, I'm going to be using fusible interfacing instead of the freezer paper method. And I have a tutorial for that on my channel too. So if you're interested in using this technique, there is a tutorial for Turned Edge Applique using freezer paper and starch. And I also have another tutorial for the fusible interfacing, and I will post links to both of those tutorials in the description box below. So now it's time to prepare my pieces and finish this project. Okay, so I've prepared all my pieces ready to applique. The one change that I did make is that initially I had cut out the vines out of freezer paper too, but it turned out to be, they're just too narrow, so it was very difficult to turn the seam allowances under, so I ended up also cutting them from fusible interfacing. And so I will be using a blanket stitch for these fusible interfacing pieces, like the beaks and the eyes and the branches. And then of course for the rest, I will just use an invisible stitch. And then I just had two pieces here. These were very, very narrow ones, so I will embroider these two stems right here. And so time to start appliquing. Here's my finished block. All that's left now is to quilt it and use it for my project. This will be a cushion cover, and I'm pretty pleased with it. Let's look at some other examples now of designs where you can use this technique. Once again, I like using this technique for blocks where I have larger pieces. So for example, in this one, here this is the little tree house, and there's a pretty large piece right here, which is the trunk itself that makes up this little tree house. But then we have a lot of little ones that are little pieces that are on top of this. Now, what we can do is, if we break this down, there's certain pieces that, because they're very small, I wouldn't use the freezer paper anyway. But say that in this case, we could go ahead and cut the big piece out, right? But then go ahead and cut out these pieces too. So that means that you will have a gap here in the trunk piece, which is okay because these will be laid down on top of them anyway. What you will have to do is, when you cut out the big trunk piece, is make sure that you leave fabric underneath so that there will be fabric on top of which you can applique these pieces. Okay, so I would go ahead and cut out all of these pieces, but I would probably use another technique, like maybe the fusible interfacing, or I would just trace some of these templates separately from this technique where you cut all of the pieces from the freezer paper sheet. But so then all of these you could use this technique for. I would probably use a different technique for the windows, or trace the windows separately. Then let's look at some others. These are very clear designs that you can use this technique for. The difference here would probably be the stem, which I don't know if you want to use freezer paper or if you want to use some other technique, but once again you can just print out the whole design on freezer paper and then cut out the different pieces from that. And then of course here this one would be cut out from inside the big heart, but that's okay. It's okay that, as long as you have all the edges that you can iron onto the fabric, you'll be okay with that one. Here's another one. Once again, if you cut out the circles, that's fine. If you can cut them out without any distortion, which might be kind of tricky. Otherwise, you might want to use some other technique for the circles themselves. And the same then for these little stems here. Anything that involves a straight line but thin line, you might want to consider using another technique that isn't with freezer paper, because these are very, very narrow. But the rest of the pieces, there's no problem using this technique for that. And then here's one where I probably wouldn't use this technique because these are so small, and it would be very hard to use the freezer paper technique for these. I would rather use some other technique, except for the leaves. And in that case, I mean, you might as well just trace these leaves separately. So try the technique out. I mean, as I said, this is one that works really well with large pieces, with simple designs. I would not recommend this for very intricate designs where you have a lot of pieces laid over each other. But for designs like these simple designs, it works really well. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for watching.